Hi, everybody. It's Lee Caraher, and this is Everything Speaks, where we talk about how every word, every gesture, every silence, everything you do and don't do speaks for you, if you want it to or not. Now we can line all those things up so you deliver the message you want to your employees, to the media, to your customers, all the peeps. Today, we're going to talk about clarity and how clarity looks simple, but it's not simple to get there. Right. And better said, clarity isn't simple. It's just disciplined. And I think it was Walt Whitman who said, I'm sorry for the long letter. I didn't have time to edit. I didn't have time to make it shorter. And because getting it down to the core point is hard. I talk all the time about how context is King Kong, and you have to understand the context and you have to place something in time and around the situation. However, you don't have to present all the context before you present the point. So something I was working on with a new client last week was this core message that the team wanted to deliver to the industry, talking about what their vision is, how they're going to deliver value to their customers, all the things, right? So they're working on this message, the strategies, the priorities, a bit of a shift in direction. And I always say, we need to make it simpler. We need to make it simpler. And usually someone says, well, it's more nuanced than that. Everything is more nuanced than that. We do not live in a black and white world. We live in a world of shades of gray. So that is a given. So the nuance is a given, period, right? Also, we might hear, I don't want to oversimplify this. This is important. People need to understand all the pieces. And I get that. Nobody wants to sound like they're dumbing things down. But here's the problem is that most of the time that we're talking, we aren't oversimplifying, we're over-explaining. I think probably a few months ago, we talked about the Barbra Streisand effect, where by over-explaining something that you want to go away, you make it bigger. And the same sort of idea applies here, that by over-explaining a point, by surrounding it with everything that matters to that point, like how you got to that point, you are not simplifying the message. You are over-explaining. Now, it is true that we need all the context. I'm not going to ever go away from context is important. Ever, 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 ever. However, how do we get down to something that people can take away? And that is the core point. So when we're thinking about, and this is something, I think my last podcast, was about how your employees are always your first audience. The first public and public relations is your employees. And so if you think about how you're going to deliver something to an all hands meeting, it's a big message, right? It's a big pivot. It's a shift in priorities. Maybe it's a reallocation of resources. Some things are going to get more attention. Some things are going to get less attention. People are going to be impacted. All that is normal. All that is necessary in business. And when you get to the deck, usually this is where I come in. It would be better if we came in like at the beginning. But often I come in after the first deck is done. And it's, this last one was probably 14, 15 pages, all explaining the strategy. This is for an all hands meeting deck. And it was like 14, 15, I think that's what it was, pages of all explaining the strategy. 15 pages of strategy. There was a slide on market context. There was a slide on historical performance. There's a slide on future opportunities. There's slides with lots of diagrams that moved, showing up and to the right, which is where we all want to be, up and to the right. And all of it was information that was important. But somewhere in there was the actual point that we wanted all the people in the company to take away from the meeting. So I asked, what do you need people to do differently after this meeting? And someone said, well, we need them to understand the direction. And with 15 slides, that is a hope. That's not an action. You need one slide. We need people to understand the direction. So I said, we need to get that on one slide. That's the first slide. I'm like, we can't do it without talk. No, you're going to put everything else in the appendix. Let's think about one slide. I'm not asking you to get rid of all the stuff. We're going to put it all in the appendix so that when people ask questions, you can bring up the relevant slide if you need to. But we need to get to one slide. What's the direction? So we worked it out. And it took hours. It took hours because that is the work of clarification. The work of clarification is to figure out what doesn't need to be there. And everyone has a point of view. My thing's the most important. No, that's the most important. No, this is the most important to engineering. No, that's the most important to HR. No, there needs to be one point for the whole team. And then that gets translated into different supporting teams' roles in making that one point come to life. So for this exercise and talking about it, then literally hours, and we got down to the one sentence and I won't tell you what it was, but it was, we're focusing on X, which means we're stopping Y and we're prioritizing Z for lack of, we're going to do this. We're going to do less of that. And we're going to prioritize this. And that was it. It was one sentence so that it was clear. And I said, you just have to be ready not to explain yourself. Just let it sit, let it marinate. And then you can explain why. So it's it's comfortable. Right? Well, what about this? It's not just about that. It's what about this context, or what about this exception? Because there's always an exception to the rule. People might misunderstand. And I said, yeah, they might. With 15 slides, they're definitely going to misunderstand. Period. With 5 slides, we need one slide, one message on the takeaway, and then everything else goes behind it. So it's very disciplined. It's very hard to do because it's not like you got to this new vision, new direction without a ton of work, without a ton of research, without a ton of thinking, without a ton of back and forth until you got to the point where you need to deliver this message to your staff. However, you have to boil it down, clarify one statement. What do people need to know? Like I said earlier, clarity requires choosing, and choosing means you're going to leave something out of that one slide. You're going to leave something out. You can't get it all on there. And for God's sakes, don't do the IBM 3 bullets on a slide, every single slide kind of thing. And this is really hard. It's the wrestling with the words, the wrestling with the priorities, wrestling with the impact. Because what we do when we don't tell the whole story, we feel like we're being incomplete. And really what we're doing is being usable and being understandable. Long stories, my colleague Tricia says, Lee, there's always a story with you. That is true. I only use the stories when A, we have time, and B, it's not critical. No one needs to, how I preface that is, Lee, so why did you move to Wisconsin? That's a long story. You need a cocktail for that. But bottom line, we moved to Wisconsin for this reason. There was a lot that went into that decision. Usually most A, people don't care, and B, we don't have time because there's a lot that move into it. But sometimes it's fun over a cocktail party. Let's get a margarita. I'll tell you the whole thing. Anyway, back on track. See, a story. So why do we do this? One, we equate complexity with credibility. And so if it sounds complicated, it must be really smart. Like if it's, if you don't have an engineering degree and you can't decide and you can't understand it, it must be really, really smart. But the people who really understand something, they can explain it simply. They can explain it to my dog. They can explain it, we always say, does your mother understand it? No, of course, that's degrading mothers, particularly those of us who are working. But can they really understand it? Can they explain it simply without having to have a cocktail to have the whole story around it? Can they do that? Second, we want to protect ourselves. If we include all the nuances, all the caveats, and it depends on this, or maybe this will happen, then we can't be wrong because it's a risk, right? A new strategy is a risk. The old strategy staying with it is probably also a risk. But a new strategy risk, like what if you make the wrong decision? Well, what if? So all the nuances, though, actually lessen the impact of your message, lessen the importance of the direction, because not everyone's going to get all the caveats. Not everyone's going to get all the nuances. Not everyone's going to get all the what ifs. They have to get the message. So if they don't get the message, it doesn't really matter. You have to get everybody on side when you are moving direction, when you're changing things. And third, we think that about what we need to know, but not what they need to know. So everybody in your team needs to know a little bit something different depending on their role. So, and of course, you should have obviously, we're getting to this point because people have decided everybody's important. Have decided this is fully baked. And it's been challenged and we figured out all the implications for all the different groups. But not everybody in marketing needs to understand everything about engineering. And not everybody in engineering needs to understand the implications of everybody in customer service and so on and so on and so on. We all need to know where we're going. Everyone needs to know where they're going. And then they need to translate it down to their role on their team to the goal. And you're not going to get that on one slide ever. So I've done this as, we started the company, Double Forte. We started the company just with 2 levels because I wasn't going to hire anybody who didn't have 10 years of experience. Got to 2008, and the first downturn I managed in that company. And I realized that we were going to hit a donut hole. Most people, there were not very many people hired in our industry between 2000 and 2004. So we're going to run out of people who had 10 years of experience soon. So I had to change the model. I remember talking about this with my team and my co-founder, Dan Stevens, and we were talking it all through. I said, come on, talk this to the team. We're going to tell this, everyone. We're going to explain it, all these things. We're going to give all the numbers. And Dan just goes, just tell people we're going to hire entry-level people, Lee. Just tell them that. And then tell them why. Oh, okay. Duh. So I've been there. I get it. Even my little bitty company. Oh my gosh. And I always remember that when I'm talking with someone who has to talk to 10 people or has to talk to 10,000 people. It's the same exercise. 10 people to 10,000 people is the same exercise. What's the message? What's the direction? What does everyone need to know? What does everyone need to know? And then you can go to the back. So another way to think about it is that clarity is not saying less because it's easier. It's about saying less because it's harder and it's more effective. Voila, it's more effective. So how do you get to this point? How do you make this real? 1, you start with the decision, not the explanation. We don't want to have to let's not build up to the point. This is not a magic trick where there's ta-da at the end. There might be ta-da after you've bookended the whole thing, but most people like to build up to the point as this big reveal. Let's not do that. Let's lead with the decision. We're doing this and then explain why, not the other way around. Number 1. Number 2, we have to use the which means. Some people call it, filter or test. After each big statement, you have to explain what this means. So we're doing X, which means Y. If you can't finish that sentence with a clear action or implication, you're not done yet. You have to also have clarity in the which means Y part. Maybe we're focusing on growth. So which means that we are hiring, we're changing our pricing, we're going into new markets. What does it mean? Force that clarity. Too often we want to, you hear, oh, let's circle back on that. No, don't let anyone circle back on this. Stay in the room. Stay in the room until you can actually answer the question. We're doing this, which means why? Force that clarity all the time. And then you got to cut until it feels a little uncomfortable. You'll know that you're in the zone when it feels like you have to say a little more, right? If you're totally comfortable with how much detail's there, you probably haven't cut enough. Just going to say that again. If you're totally comfortable that everything you need there to explain it is on the slide, you haven't probably cut it enough. But you're getting close. So the point is to add the nuance later, not up front. And I really like the idea of using appendices because appendices don't say they're. If you put something in an appendix, it is referenceable. It is still important, but it's a question of priority and where you put it in, how you place things in a deck, in a presentation. It's really important. It's not just about getting everything on the pages like, oh, this is a nice deck. It's about what is the order? How are you going to use it? And then how do you push things down to an appendix and then bring them back up to answer a specific question, maybe for a specific group? I'm not asking you to ignore the complexity. You just don't lead with the complexity. Get people aligned on the main idea first, then handle the exceptions or handle the specifics. So back to that client I was helping, basically it was a long day. That's a long day. But once we got to that one thing, like the rest of it flew and flowed really well. And so, they delivered that one sentence first, and then they supported with a few key points at the macro level. And maybe that ended up being 5 major slides. And then the appendix was probably 14 slides, which had the strategy and the research and the what it means for marketing and all those things, all the different pieces, all the different roles. But the whole point of that first meeting was not what was marketing going to do Tuesday on a February. It was, what is the big point for the company? And what does it mean we're going to do? And what does it mean we're not going to do? That was the whole point of that first rollout. Also remember this, one and done, you're never done. There's no such thing as one and done in communication. You have to roll things out over time with repetition and reinforcement. So afterwards, the meeting was shorter than it would have been with the 14 slides. We had the whole appendix there. And the CEO said, we have a lot of other things to talk about. There'll be a lot of specifics in different groups, but let's just focus on this first. And when we asked the question after that meeting, what did you hear? Pretty much everybody had the same answer because it was on one slide and it was really simple. Not similar. Pretty much everybody had the same answer, which is the point. The point is to have everybody carry the same water, carry the same message on the direction. So when you are, and then the next phase was for people to internalize it, have to take questions back to their own teams. What does it mean for us? If that's the plan, what does it mean for us? What we won't do? Who do we need to coordinate with? And then the next phase was bringing all those pieces in. And then, basically over the next month, it was pulling basically pieces of the appendix up so that people, as they came to embrace it, not just say it, embrace it, they understood their place in that new one slide direction. Because, think about what's at stake on this. One, you get everybody on all hands. That's an expensive meeting, no matter how big you are. That is an expensive meeting. So you need to drive clarity into all those all hands, all those things. Because when you're unclear, people fill in the gaps. They create their own versions. How many times have you seen that happen? And they hedge and they wait for the real thing. They wait for the shoe to drop, or they wait for someone to get mad or whatever. But when you're clear, people move. People align. They figure out, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for me? And how are we going to interact with it? Who do we need? Who are dependent on, and all the things? And they act, and that's the job. Our job in communication is to communicate. But what does that do? A communication inspires action. And that action could just be clapping. We're done. That action could be something new. But if you had a presentation and no one leaves with an aha, why bother? That could have been an email. I might have a sticker about that. All right, everybody. So next time you're working on the message and someone says, can we make it simpler? The answer is yes. And what if you actually said, we're going to make this simpler from the beginning of the meeting? And so you didn't have to have someone press back on you. Just a thought. Just a thought. Clarity isn't about dumbing things down. Clarity is about making your message usable. And usable is what drives action, because everything speaks. All right. It all comes around to the end. All right, everybody. I'm Lee Caraher, and this is Everything Speaks. Until next time.